Welcome to the Bitcoin Business Podcast put on by Sovereign. I'm your host, Brandon Karpeles, and today I have with me someone who is doing something similar to Sovereign, but with an expertise and a focus in the energy sector. And without further ado, I will welcome Matt Agee. Did I pronounce that right, or is it Agee?
It's AG, close
Agee.
enough.
Oh,
I get
0 for
get
2.
that all the
Jeez
time.
Louise. Okay. All right.
No problem. Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I asked how to pronounce or how you want to go by your first name before we hopped on, but I didn't ask how to correctly pronounce your last name. So, as someone whose last name is consistently butchered, that one's on me. All right, well, Matt, thank you for joining us. So, why don't we start with we'll get into all the energy. Obviously, energy is a bit of a focus in the world today, just a tad. So we'll get into all that stuff in a little bit. But before we go off talking about that, why don't you tell people a little bit about O21 Solutions, your company, what you're doing there, and how you got to this point, what you were doing before, and how you got the Bitcoin bug, and what led you to start the company.
Absolutely, yeah. So my name is Matt Agee. I've been in the energy sector for 20 years at major companies like ExxonMobil and Amazon Web Services. And about this time last year, I went off on my own. And then, after a few weeks of doing things like playing golf and spending time with the family, I realized that, there's this burgeoning mega trend of Bitcoin adoption with businesses, and I felt like I wanted to be a part of that as a Bitcoiner. And so what we do at O21 is essentially Bitcoin strategy as a service. And as you noted, we have a focus on the energy sector specifically with business adoption and predominantly oil and gas within that. Although I'm open to serving any small, medium, large business, public or private. My background and history and experiences with energy and integrated oil and gas specifically. So what is Bitcoin strategy as a service? Um, if you look at the capabilities of Bitcoin and what it provides from mining through payment and settlement to treasury, we seek holistic Bitcoin solutions across everything that Bitcoin has to offer and try to package that in a way that makes sense for the customer or the company that we're interacting with. And then there's ancillary services that come along with that, like accounting and tax, communications, coaching, custody, and all of the like that you have to kind of understand and manage if you're implementing a Bitcoin solution. So we help accelerate that adoption for businesses so that you know those that don't have the Bitcoin expertise or understanding can be matched with high quality partners, Bitcoin only partners in the sector, and accelerate their adoption.
Yeah, so like I said, a lot very similar to what Sovereign's doing with a focus on, listen, businesses are going to have to get up to speed on Bitcoin. It's happening. We're in the very early stages of that happening. I would say we're probably like in the top of the first of that happening. And for those of you listening that aren't familiar with baseball, there's 9 innings in a game, and it has a top and a bottom of each inning. And so we're like in the top of the very first inning of a long game, and all of this is to say that there is going to be such a large pie out there for people that have expertise in the Bitcoin space that are willing to impart their knowledge on other people. And at Sovereign, we are focused on the treasury, the payments, the education, and ultimately the sort of business planning for your company. But to your point, you're talking about there's tax solutions, there's individual industries, and certainly what you're doing with the energy industry. Last week, I had um, a gentleman on here who was talking about putting together solar farms, combining it with regenerative farming, and using energy that way to do Bitcoin mining and all sorts of other different types of ways to finance farming and use different types of energy to do the Bitcoin mining. And so now this week we're talking about oil and gas. Maybe next week I'll have to have on like a nuclear expert or or a fusion expert or something like that. But so why don't you talk a little bit about what you're doing on the energy side of things, specifically the oil and gas companies that you're dealing with? What is their pain point? What do they need help with, and how are you helping them with that?
Yeah, it's Bitcoin is so versatile and it's really kind of a miracle technology in that sense because I mean there's so many different use cases and we're just scratching the surface of them. But my background is in energy and kind of why focus on that is I had a role or a job role at ExxonMobil back in 2016 to 2018 focused on the global energy landscape, writing their outlook for energy, and that was kind of a transformative experience for me that really put into perspective the importance of energy to just the fundamental way of life that we have, economic growth, prosperity, and how they're intertwined. Energy means that you can have good healthcare, good education, you can go to work, you can have transportation, and all these fundamental services throughout your day. And the thesis that I'm operating under is that Bitcoin, if it's the future of money, right? If companies are capitalized on fiat currency, even if it's the U.S. dollar, longer term, because of inflationary pressures, monetary debasement, money printing, that eventually that's going to be something that is going to come back to hurt companies that are capitalized solely on fiat currency, and that they should be preparing, as they would with any global megatrend, to position themselves for resilience during that monetary transition. So that's the underlying thesis. But as you pointed out, right, there's much more practical monetary and operational problems that Bitcoin solves that just makes it really a match made in heaven for oil and gas companies. And a lot of those you might be familiar with, but especially just to start on the mining front, use cases like stranded energy, wasted energy, flared gas, and either other maybe novel portions of the oil and gas value chain that are underutilized today that I'd like to see even more adoption and uptake with Bitcoin mining. So example like downstream manufacturing and refineries, I think there's a use case there. I think LNG, there's a big use case there. Even on the sustainability front with things like carbon capture and sequestration, there could be use cases there. So I think there's a large untapped slate of solutions that the oil and gas industry requires that Bitcoin can provide. So generally, I kind of view it as like a tool as oil and gas, like a supply chain or a trading type of a function is kind of an optimizing function. If you look out across between like the upstream where you produce or the downstream where you refine, and everything in between, there's a vast logistics network, and they have supply chain capabilities and trading capabilities to help optimize that footprint. I view Bitcoin in much the same way as this tool for energy efficiency and capturing wasted or stranded value, like throughout the value chain from end to end. So, it's a tool for resilience. It's a tool for energy efficiency. It's a tool for sustainability and emissions mitigation. And it's a tool for long-term savings, right? It's a store of value in their treasury. So I speak to all of these things with customers.
So, of the people you're interacting with, of the companies you're interacting with, how many of them really understand the value proposition of Bitcoin? To your point, they understand the store of value, they understand the broken monetary system. Capitalizing a company on fiat currency is a plan for long-term ruin. How many of them understand that? And then how many of them are just like Bitcoin mining solving a solution? It's a bridge to fiat currency, and I can just get more of that fiat currency to put back into my company, and therefore I'm going to do it just because I'd be a fool not to. And they're kind of just taking a hyper practical, sort of hit you over the head, obvious approach to things.
In my experience, practically over the last year of doing this, it's 100% the latter. 100% is I have a problem, I'm losing money. I don't care that it's Bitcoin, but it's a solution to a problem that I have today. And it helps me keep my oil well online, or it helps with a natural gas offtake solution. But it's almost like somebody under the table hiring a hitman to take care of a problem. It's like the less you tell me about it, the better, right? I don't want to know about it. Just solve the problem, you know? That's the attitude today, unfortunately, like because I think there's a lot of people within these companies that understand sound money, like in the long-term value proposition that that has. But that's not the problem that it's solving today. And where the industry is today is trying to solve practical problems in their operations. Now, maybe that's a beachhead or a foothold into the broader conversation around treasury strategies or circular economies or payment or even broadening the spectrum of mining opportunity. But today, that's where they are.
Yeah, that's unfortunate. And to your point, all those things, that's that's why we're in Bitcoin, because of the freedom, because of the disruption to the current system, using it as payment, not being beholden to a third party approving your transactions, all that kind of stuff. And as well, the number go up part of things, the increase in your purchasing power is important, and maybe that will be the thing that at least starts the inquiry into, okay, what is this Bitcoin thing? And they get involved with it, and then 5 years and they're like, oh, we got involved with Bitcoin, it was $70,000 a coin, and all of a sudden 5 years from now it's 270,000, and they're like, well, maybe I should learn about this. And so unfortunately, with all this stuff, it just takes so much time and multiple touch points. And to your point, beachhead, foothold, whatever you want to call it, maybe this is just the first touch point for these folks.
Yeah, and with the price kind of being where it is, and I don't focus too much on the price, but roughly 45% down from all-time high. Like this is the time for oil and gas companies to actually move into mining, right, and into Bitcoin. We've got public miners, like public, large centralized miners, kind of forking off to AI and HPC. We have elevated oil prices right now that are going to have the impact of increasing revenue and margins in their core business. We have the price kind of depressed nearish 200-week moving averages. Potentially cheap distressed ASICs from people not adding hash rate to their operations. And with that, kind of the plateaued difficulty and hash rate. So also, if you look at the price dynamics between oil commodity price and Bitcoin price, they're somewhat countercyclical. So like today in 2026, oil prices are high, Bitcoin price is relatively low. In 2022, with Ukraine and Russia, it was the same thing. Oil prices were high, Bitcoin price was low. And so I kind of see it as this addition to the portfolio that provides a counter-cyclical commodity price exposure. And like right now is the time for them to start moving. And I think ultimately with smaller to medium size distributed hash rate throughout the oil and gas value chain around the world, I think that's good for oil and gas and that's good for Bitcoin as far as the mining picture goes.
Yeah, I don't think there's any argument that there's a centralization problem with the pools. I don't think anyone can dispute that. That's very obvious, and what's going on there. And there have been issues around. Just I think it was last week there was just a block reorg by one of the larger pools, and that's now nothing malicious happened. And of course, at the end of the day, the network will still continue to go on, but it's just not a situation we should be finding ourselves in. And to your point, I don't know. I'm curious to get your thoughts on this, but I've always been of the opinion that Bitcoin mining has to decentralize. That it's going to be forced to decentralize because the cost will become too prohibitive to continue mining. And so on a long enough time horizon, you can't, to your point, I like the way you said it earlier, you can't have a business capitalized on fiat, which the miners are. The miners are, because their unit of account is fiat, and unfortunately it kind of has to be, because they have utility bills to pay in fiat, they have capital expenditures they have to pay in fiat, et cetera, et cetera.
Mm-hmm.
And that when you're selling Bitcoin continuously over time to meet your fiat obligations, that eventually you're not going to be able to do that as inflation creeps into all the other parts of your business, including the most important item, the energy input cost. And so at some point, you're just going to have the energy input costs outstrip the ability of you as a quote unquote profitable, you as a business, as a fiat mining operation to generate a profit. And I'm curious if you see that the same way, or or if you think differently.
No, I do, and you see it today too. I mean, the mining industry has had to reinvent itself multiple times. From mining Bitcoin and just liquidating to pay the bills and grow hash rate to becoming, treasury companies themselves, and now AI HPC companies. They're kind of always having to reinvent because the every 4 years their revenue gets cut in half. Right? It's an absolutely brutal industry, and I don't blame them for chasing higher margins with AI and HPC given the capabilities that they have. It's a logical conclusion, and it's part of their capability, and it's a better opportunity in the near term. And so I think like you said, hash rate will be pushed to where there's kind of marginal cost of energy or free or stranded energy in a distributed way, or it's just people like you and me, doing home operations, and we don't care about the electricity bill because it's on the margins. So I think it's kind of nation state level mining, right, where they can print infinite fiat to fund whatever they want, or it's energy companies with the resources, or it's home miners, right, with small operations, that longer term, right, and there's a runway to that. Depending on how people flow their excess revenues or profits from side activities back into Bitcoin, if that's something they choose to do. So, but yeah, no, I think like I said, like now's a good time for oil and gas companies to start that, and I think you see a lot of miners pivoting to energy, right? Like AI, HPC, but also energy, because that's, like you said, that's where their inputs affect the bottom line. But I think it would be much easier for oil and gas companies and energy companies to pivot into being Bitcoin miners than vice versa. I think that would just be an easier pathway for them to succeed.
100% agree. And that was kind of the second part of my question. But I do want to touch on, excuse me, something you mentioned in there, which is the nation states being able to sort of print infinite amounts of currency to do this, or even just straight up operating at a loss. They don't even necessarily print the money.
Yep.
Or they don't print the money to fund the operations. They just operate at a loss and then print the money to inflate the currency and devalue you to fund the losses effectively of the operation. And that all gets back to, if you were, what I was talking about earlier in terms of mining decentralizing and really going back to almost individual miners, where that's exactly what you're talking about. It has to be sort of a price agnostic individual who just wants the sats and who wants to collect more Bitcoin and is willing to pay for the energy cost as opposed to paying the dollar cost of going on an exchange buying it. But to that point, that's why the unit of account part is so important, because once these nation states are unable to print their own currency, then they can't run that game anymore. They cannot. They will have to turn the miners off. Now, they could go they could raise taxes to 80%, or they could go stick a gun in people's faces and get the money that way. But they lose the ability to subsidize or fund the Bitcoin mining operations, either from directly the printed currency or the inflation of the currency to subsidize the losses. And that's, we could be 80 years, 100 years away from that. Who knows what that timeline is, but eventually I think that is where we get to. But anyways, back to your point about the energy companies moving into Bitcoin mining. That is tied in. I wanted to get to that point before because it's tied into this idea of, as if you can mitigate your energy costs, that's really the way you are able to continue mining and run a profitable venture, is when you don't have the inflation in your energy costs. And really the only way to not have inflation in your energy costs is to control the actual energy itself.
Yeah. Yeah, and like a fun fact here, like I think we had last week a Brent, a dated Brent all-time high nominally, like something like $145 a barrel. But it's funny because that was a nominal all-time high, and the previous one was in 2008. But the real cost to that, right, is the U.S. dollar lost about 33% of its purchasing power since 2008, which is why it was only a nominal all-time high. And on a real basis, it would be like something like $215 a barrel.
Well, and
So,
if you priced it in gold, it was probably even more extreme, right? Like,
right.
yeah,
So it's just another advertisement for Bitcoin,
yeah,
right?
yes.
Like it's a chance to say, yeah, it's a nominal all-time high, but the U.S. dollar lost 33% of its purchasing power, a third, since 2008, which, most of our minds wasn't that long ago. And so, like, you kind of think about that. It's like, did I get a 2% raise at my job every year since 2008? If not, you're worse off than you were back then. So it's just kind of, you get these daily little reminders about monetary debasement, and they're really good reminders and examples of why Bitcoin's so important.
So how are you out there finding these companies? Are you just looking for stranded wells? Do you have a no pun intended pipeline of people you've worked with in the past? How are you sort of matching your Bitcoin world with the stranded energy suppliers?
Yeah, so for the last year, been really focused on building out my network within the Bitcoin community because I've kind of come into the community from a professional sense really cold, from a career in big tech and in oil and gas. And so just, going to conferences and building my network and building, high quality Bitcoin only partnerships with, in my view, some of the best folks in the industry to be able to deliver on these Bitcoin strategies because going into consulting and talking about Bitcoin is great, but if you can't deliver the actual capabilities, then you're probably not much use. So a lot of just kind of organic things like that, and kind of through that process, have a few relationships with some folks doing some off-grid mining out in West Texas, doing training and education, and through that, just kind of have a top of funnel, folks who are interested in getting spinning up a Bitcoin mining operation. And then I can talk to them about, broader Bitcoin 101 education, other capabilities like treasury strategies or even maybe lending strategies, and then necessary things like custody, exchange buy sell capability, insurance tax, and things like that. So really just organic, on the ground, in person or virtual meetings, conferences, and things like that so far. Almost zero marketing or activities like that online, apart from just being active on X or on LinkedIn. So that's the strategy so far, but probably need to figure out, how to be a little bit more active, customer facing for the next year is a goal of mine in terms of being Bitcoin community facing, being really more front and center with the customers I'm trying to serve.
Yeah, it's hard. As someone who, like I said, is doing something similar, it's tough finding that balance, right? How much time do you spend making connections and good networking, and then also at the end of the day, most of the people you're going to be dealing with are not Bitcoin focused or not Bitcoin centered, and so how do you divide up your time between them is definitely a difficult challenge.
Yeah, and the other thing I would say is like being a consultant. There's lots of consultancies out there, and many of them have existing relationships with oil and gas companies. Just as a point of differentiation, right? We are Bitcoin only. Like Bitcoin is the only neutral global commodity without an issuer. It's the only global money like that that's neutral. And existing consultancies tend to focus on technology implementations and call it blockchain, Web3, DeFi, crypto, stable coins, whatever it is. And some of that's fine if you have a particular technology use case and you want to apply some other technology that's centralized to be able to do that. But they're not really interested in focusing on Bitcoin because I don't think there's as much opportunity for long duration technology implementations there. It's a little bit more simple and straightforward, right? It's not easy to understand, but that's where we focus, and we think that's a key differentiator versus other existing consultancies that have a blockchain component.
There's no doubt. I mean, you go out and just look on the internet, search for these firms and everything, it's all crypto, Web3, blockchain, tokenize this, tokenize that. And it's it's interesting because really at the end of the day, you are selling the value proposition of a hard money. You're convincing a business to you're helping businesses to understand that Bitcoin is money, its value proposition is money, and then saying, oh, by the way, there's also all of this technical implementation that you're going to need help with to access this harder form, this better form of money. And that's what we're here to help you do, both understand it and then implement it. And yeah, then at the same time, you just have this sea of noise of all these other different tech projects. And we'll help you do the tech side of it. But at the end of the day, we're not, yes, we will help you along with the tech side, but we're really not here to advise you on how to use technology. We're here to help you capitalize your business with a better money, how to use the monetary rails as a medium of exchange for a better money, and position yourself for the future. That like we're here to give you a 5 to 10 year head start, and to start saving in a better money today, to start preserving your purchasing power into the future today. And we're not here to help you avert disaster. This is not like Bitcoin's going to come in and save your company by December of this year or anything like that. This is a 5 to 10 year operation that we're helping you get set up for. And it is hard. There's a lot of businesses that they're so focused on the day to day. They're stuck in the fiat world. They have a line of credit with a business cycle where they're just constantly turning things over and constantly borrowing more and on to the next production cycle. And they don't even think about these things. It's just they're living quarter to quarter. And so while you're in there trying to explain better money, trying to explain the technical aspect, you're also trying to reorient their thinking from months to years or decades.
Yeah, absolutely. And one interesting thing that I find about Bitcoin is, and I don't know how you feel being a Bitcoiner, but since being around it for 6 or 7 years or so, it kind of changes the way that you see the world. It changes the way that you prioritize how you spend your time or how you allocate your resources. And this is one of the things that I like to talk about. And the other thing that I focus on, apart from the mechanics of adopting and integrating Bitcoin into your operations, is the impact that it can have on your corporate strategy, or if it's smaller than a corporate, like a division or a business unit within your company, how it can impact your leadership, your culture, and just the way that you do business, and then the quality of your product and service offerings to your customers and the way that you treat your customers. And so that's the other lens that we have. Maybe a little bit different is more of the management consulting side. How Bitcoin can help inform your overall corporate strategy and be integrated into your leadership principles and a part of a corporate culture change or transformation based on Bitcoin-oriented principles. So we have a toolkit and a process that we facilitate to walk companies through that process, along with just the mechanics of accumulating Bitcoin on the balance sheet or mining or accepting as payment.
100%. I couldn't agree more. And it's hard to tell business owners that and just sort of be like, oh, trust me, you will see these benefits. But now, I don't know if you saw, I think it was, excuse me, like 2 weeks ago, Oshi Rewards came out with a whole analysis of Bitcoin customers. And so now there's all these statistics about Bitcoin customers spending more money, making fewer but larger purchases, so thought through purchases. They are more loyal, so they stick around for a longer period of time. They have a much higher incidence of repeat purchases. And there's all these statistics about when you have Bitcoiners as your customer, you start to reorient your business, like you were talking about. You start to look at things differently. You start to take a different approach to the product you're putting out. And if you are putting out products where you know that people are repeat buyers, they're spending more money, you're going to be much less likely to degrade the quality of your product because that's why they're coming to you, that's why they're doing it, as opposed to you have some nameless, faceless, just fiat person on the other end of your transaction. It's like, I mean, I don't really have a choice. I'm not going to stay in business. I can't pass the cost along. And so now we're starting to get almost like a statistical analysis and prove up of the fact that actually reorienting your company around Bitcoin and Bitcoiners actually does lead to better outcomes. And it's nice to have that information. And I don't know if you saw that or not, but I'm looking
I
forward
haven't.
to,
I,
yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
no, I haven't. I haven't seen it, but I believe it. And anecdotally, like you see the case study of like Steak and Shake, for example, and they've published, I think, some data on same store sales and increasing sales as they have successfully oriented their company towards a Bitcoin ethos, and other examples like that. But I definitely believe that Bitcoiners, who are probably the kind of the future epicenter of discretionary income, are willing to spend more for higher quality products that align with their values. So I definitely believe that.
Yeah, 100%. And then as you as it trickles out through the organization as well, then you start to get employees that are excited that Steak and Shake's also doing. I forget it. It's like 21 sats of every purchase in Bitcoin goes to some employee fund, or it's an extra. It's 21 sats an hour. I forget exactly
Yeah.
what they're
Mhm.
doing, but yeah, and that's how you ingratiate yourselves to your employees and make them want to stick around. And so you have less turnover, spend less time hiring people, a happier workforce, and then your workforce will start to feel value. I mean, so much of why everyone is so miserable in corporate America and just the workforce in general is not even necessarily because their job sucks. Like 95% of jobs suck at the end of the day. Like they're even working at Bitcoin, like it's great working at Bitcoin and it's cool. You get to be around Bitcoin, but a lot of the day to day, the administrative stuff, I mean, you still have to manage a checkbook, you still have to reach out to customers, you still have to administrate a business. Like, that's not fun. And you have to do that at every single business, anyways. And so it's it's that people don't feel valued or appreciated. It's like you could be doing almost anything and it could suck, but if you felt like your employer cared about you and that you had a purpose for being there, like, oh, I'm contributing to something that's bigger than me, I'm contributing to this company, and this company cares about me because they see that I care about the work I'm doing, and you get this sort of virtuous cycle of the way business is supposed to work, and capitalism, real capitalism, not this bastardized version we live in the United States today. But that's you start to get back to sort of this, for lack of a better way to frame it, is Protestant work ethic, and valuing your work, and in the Protestant work ethic, you're serving God and God serves you back, but it's the same thing on earth when you have your relationship amongst human beings, employer employee. And that's the way this stuff is supposed to work, as opposed to this completely extractive system we're operating under, where you basically have people at the top are saying, how do I get the most out of these people, by giving them the least, but so that they don't leave. And it's like this horribly perverse set of incentives and relationship that gets built in when you have this inflating and depreciating currency.
Yeah, I think the culture and the principles underlying Bitcoin. Now we can get into like Bitcoin is not ubiquitous or uniform, like in terms of its user base. Obviously, there's conflict within it, but I think they're transformative overall, and that could permeate the culture of an organization from the corporate strategy all the way through to the day to day, to your performance management process, like performance and evaluation and compensation, leadership or executive compensation, all of those types of activities. that traditional business has a way of going through, but Bitcoin can kind of fundamentally transform what that looks like and kind of reorient what's a priority and what's important, and reward people accordingly for outcomes, or or things like that. So yeah, that's what we try to help people work through and facilitate as part of their corporate transformation.
Yeah, and it is just really hard because it is one of those things that until you've lived it, it's almost impossible to believe. Like it's it just sounds so utopian and fairy tale ish. I don't know what other word you would use to describe it, but it doesn't seem real. It doesn't seem possible, and it is almost like you have to do it to realize it. And so you're fighting this battle of how do I convince this person that this is true without them actually doing it, and that's a tough line to walk.
Yeah, and I don't know that you or I or anybody can tell somebody this. Like, I I do think that companies are going to have to just do it, and they're going to have to figure it out, and they'll learn along the way. And they may buy the top, right, and see an 80% drawdown, and then rage quit at the bottom, or they may get distracted with some type of other treasury strategy with alternative cryptocurrencies or something else, or leverage, or who knows what. But I think companies are going to follow a very similar journey to what individuals have over the last 10, 15 years. And eventually they'll find their way back to Bitcoin and figure out how to make it work on a sustainable way, funding treasuries with free cash flow or profits or earnings while producing high quality products and services, and serving their customers well.
Yeah, it's one of those things that just it sounds so simple, and it is so simple, and Bitcoin really is so simple from a sort of first principles standpoint. It's difficult from a technical understanding, but we've just added so many layers of complexity to such a simple topic, and then convinced everyone that that complexity is an improvement. And it's really been the exact opposite. It's just been a complete stripping away of the foundation of communicating economic value, and it's just been ripped away from us.
Yep.
You know, it's sad. Oh man. All right. Well, so what is the sentiment in the energy industry right now? Obviously, we have all sorts of crazy stuff going on in the world. We have whatever's going on in Iran. I am not a war expert. I am not a energy expert. I'm not in anything. But obviously, if you just look at the price of oil or assets or gold or anything, just it's all crazy. It's all chaotic, and I'm curious. What are you seeing from people inside the industry? Are they seeing this as, and I'm guessing you're US focused, so is this an opportunity, or are they just holding on to their seats? What's actually going on out there?
Yeah, so I guess let's put some of it into context, and I'll start with, I'm also not like a macro oil market analyst day to day, and it's been some time since I've spent a lot of time in the weeds of it. But the world, just to put it into perspective, like world energy demand, just global primary energy demand, is about 600 quadrillion BTUs on an annual basis, which doesn't mean anything to anybody, but it's a lot of energy. It's like
It's a big number.
it's a huge amount of energy, 600 quadrillion BTUs. And that's grown about 20% in the last 15 years. In other words, that's the equivalent of adding another North America to the world in terms of energy consumption. Like United States, Canada, Mexico. Like we just added a North America to the planet in the last 15 years in terms of energy demand. So it's large and growing, but global GDP grew about almost 50% in that time frame. Now, if energy demand grew at the same rate as GDP, you would have expected a 50% growth in energy, but that didn't happen because we also have this magical thing called energy efficiency. We figure out how to we do the same amount of work or more work with less energy, and we all kind of know what that looks like. Cars get more fuel efficient, or we get more efficient windows in our houses, or appliances get more efficient, and things like that. So that's kind of the global picture, and oil within that, is about 100 million barrels a day of demand before the conflict in Iran. Now, 100 million barrels a day of oil is also kind of a number you can't really wrap your head around, but it's about as much energy as something like 350 to 400,000 flights between New York and London. That's every day. That's how much energy we use every day. Oil,
Crazy.
excuse me.
Yeah.
That would be like, I don't know, 300 years, like 300 years of continuous flying is 100 million barrels a day. And right now with Iran, in the Strait of Hormuz blockade and things like that, that's like 30% of global seaborne oil trade and 20% of LNG that's currently kind of curtailed or offline because of the conflict. So it's a significant number, and you've seen oil prices react to that. It's been very volatile because the news changes every day. But I mentioned the nominal all-time high in Brent last week. Europe and Asia are very sensitive to this because they get a lot of their energy from the Middle East. And then you've seen the U.S. somewhat benefit from the dynamics of this situation. And one of the kind of miracles of the last 15 years is the story of the United States and what's happened domestically with oil and gas production. And it's flipped from being a net importer of energy to a net exporter. And now the United States is the largest producer of oil and gas in the world and the largest LNG exporter in the world. Now that's a miraculous change in the last 15 years, and that's been driven by technology advancements like hydraulic fracturing and horizontal drilling, which have made historically unproducible resource more accessible. And over time, those operations have become more and more efficient. There was a period of time where it was very expensive to produce, and there was a lot of competition with the Middle East and OPEC ramping up production to try to drive out U.S. shale, but that was unsuccessful. All that really did was make U.S. producers more efficient. So it's a really compelling dynamic, and it's hard to overstate the impact of the United States in the last 15 years and what's happened in the oil industry. Because if it weren't for that right now, this is the biggest supply disruption pretty much in history for global oil and gas. And if it weren't for the United States right now, oil would probably be north of $250 to $300 a barrel. So it's bad, but it's not as bad as it would have been if the supply dynamics had not had significantly changed with the United States in the last 15 years.
And so I just can't help but to think back to Bitcoin here, and we have all this increased ability to produce it. We have efficiency in the market. We have more supply, and yet we don't get to see the benefits of that deflationary process taking place in our goods and services and everything else. That all costs more, which is it's insane.
It does, and energy is obviously an input into everything, right? Every business, every consumer, every person, every family runs on energy, just at the fundamental foundational level. Food supply, industrial activity, transportation. If you're manufacturing anything, your energy inputs are getting higher. If you're transporting goods around the country, your diesel's higher. It costs more to generate electricity to consume in your house. So, that's the problem with elevated commodity prices for energy is that everybody feels it. And then, the price signal sends out a signal to the market. And, like in the mid 2000s, when oil prices were north of $100 a barrel, that's when Priuses became really popular. Hybrid cars came along, and then electric cars, and then a lot more wind and solar proliferation, a lot of alternatives, combined with elevated prices, you're more likely to see recessions and demand destruction. And so that's not good either. So, elevated energy prices are really, bad for people. And cheap, affordable energy or reliable energy is really fundamental to our way of life. And, just back to why am I doing this? It's because I want to see long-term resilient oil and gas sector, for the next 200 years. And I think Bitcoin is the way for them to do that without being disrupted by the money supply. So for me, this is kind of a discrete reminder. Although it's a supply disruption for a particular trade route, it reminds us of the importance of energy to our society and to economic growth. And I think the same thing could happen if energy companies go out of business overnight because the currency hyperinflated, right? So that's the macro risk that I'd like oil and gas companies to start paying attention to, much like they pay attention to global geopolitics or sustainability or any other macro trend.
Well, and we've seen that happen in countless other nations, right? The currency hyperinflates, the whatever energy industry or gas industry or anything, the oil industry, then it gets nationalized, right? It gets taken over by the government, and then you have a horribly inefficient market where it's the government running things, and we all know how that ends up. And
Yeah.
yeah, so yet to your point, this building resiliency, it builds an insulation where you can even deal with hyperinflation and continue to exist into the future and not have to worry about getting nationalized, taken over by the government, and just a really painful and horrible scenario if you know anyone or have any relatives or anything like that that have lived through those scenarios. I mean, talk to them about how bad that is and how awful it is. So
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, just the macro dynamics. I mean, there's the other point back to Bitcoin that I find interesting is like with oil since 1981, if you look at the cumulative amount of oil that the world has consumed, it's kind of tripled or just over tripled. But so have the technically recoverable resources, right? The available resource has also tripled, which usually, like you would think, as you consume more of a scarce commodity, the available supply of it in the world, wouldn't be as available. But with oil, it's tripled. And that's one of the reasons why I think forward-looking market participants haven't bid up the price of oil beyond $200 a barrel yet, is because they're hyper aware that if the issue in the Strait is resolved, then you have all of this OPEC spare capacity. You have United States shale capacity, which is short cycle and can be brought to market fairly quickly. And you have all of this resource that's available, that's incentivized to be produced at higher prices, that's sitting there waiting. And so I think as they're trying to weigh the likelihood of the situation resolving, that's one of the things kind of keeping oil, not really going parabolic beyond what it already has at this point. Which, back to Bitcoin, we know that there's a hard cap and there's a set issuance schedule that cannot be changed, which is a really different dynamic than what you find with traditional commodities like oil or gold or anything like that.
to me, that's probably been the most mind blowing thing to me about Bitcoin, and specifically the difficulty adjustment, is that you could throw all of the energy in the world at the network, or the cost of energy could go to zero. We could get free energy, and still the blocks would come in every 10 minutes. Like, we can have infinite levels of improvement in our oil production and getting it to market, and Bitcoin will still come in every 10. Like, when that clicked for me, that just blew my mind. It's like there's no amount of human ingenuity, deflation, economies of scale that will ever change the issuance schedule for Bitcoin. And like
Yep.
that was mind blowing.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. Like, no matter what you do, it's going to take another 115 years for the last Bitcoin to trickle out. Doesn't matter how much energy you throw at it. Yeah, it's super interesting.
And that's one of those things where you just realize how early, like, that is such a mind blowing concept and so crazy to think about in terms of what the demand for something like that in the future would be. That it, like, you could be at a point where it's not even worth a million barrels of oil to you, because it's going to take a million barrels of oil to 20 minutes or 30 minutes, or whatever the number is, a year to get that amount of Bitcoin. And I it's just one of those things that you can just barely scratch the surface of. And even trying to get to second, third, fourth, fifth order effects, it's just like, it's going to completely reshape everything.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. I had a thought, but I lost it. Sorry.
Oh, all good. I mean, these are these it's all part of the journey of being a Bitcoiner is getting these thoughts, understanding it kind of at the base level, and then you start to go, okay, what's the second order effect? Oh, what's the third order? And you're just like, I can't even. It's so crazy. I can't even think that far ahead or far down the road. And most of these situations, there's 27 different ways it could go, and you just don't know which way it's going to go. So.
Yeah, and I think it's pretty interesting, like the fact that even with this Iran situation, like the rumors of them asking for Bitcoin payment for navigating the strait as a toll, right? I haven't been able to verify that that's true or not, but it's certainly an interesting concept, right? That proves that like sovereignty at any level in the world is much appreciated, and all of a sudden a switch can flip to where people understand the value proposition of having the ability to transact despite the best efforts of even the world's biggest military, like breathing down your neck. Having a permissionless neutral money that nobody can stop you from using is a pretty powerful concept.
Well, it almost doesn't even matter if it's true. It's the fact that it could be true tells you all you need to know. Like that is the value proposition right there. That as Bitcoiners, we of course know this. This is like in our 5 bullet points of why you should adopt Bitcoin. But for the rest of the world to be looking at this, and it doesn't even have to be true. It's just, well, okay, that's possible. Then you should at least be asking the question like, okay, is it true that this is possible? And if so, then holy cow, this has opened up a whole different view on the entire situation of the monetary system, of who is in control of the money and who doesn't. And then initially they were saying that could be stable coins, but it's like stablecoin Tether could just take your payment back, so that doesn't work. Like it's
Yep.
no different than the dollar. So either the Federal Reserve or Tether or Coinbase or USDC, I don't even know who's issuing USDC these days, PayPal or
Right.
Coin, I don't know, but whoever's issuing those tokens can just take them back, and the Bitcoin is the only token, the only monetary instrument that can't be taken back. And if that's true, what are the implications of that? And I hope that will get into some people's brains and permeate. But every time I think there's a situation, and we do live in a bubble too, there's probably 90% of the world doesn't even realize that the idea of Bitcoin being accepted as payments for these tankers to get through the Strait of Hormuz was even floated out there. So
Right. Well, I wrote about this like a year ago before any of this happened. About the possibility with this burgeoning, governmental adoption with strategic reserves, and other policy that seem to endorse Bitcoin as a part of a strategic portfolio, and thinking about how energy companies could benefit or improve their adoption of Bitcoin, what that would look like as kind of like the Petro Bitcoin, right, or the Petrobit, and kind of in this future vision of cooperation or conflict with nation state level adoption and strategic reserves and oil and gas companies mining it or buying it or holding it. It's pretty easy to extend settlement of the trade or transactions in Bitcoin itself. And maybe it's a dollar or a stable coin, something on either end to kind of smooth out the volatility. But as far as like permissionless settlement of transactions, that could make your transactions a lot more efficient. How many middlemen are in the chain today when it comes to actually settling a physical or a derivative transaction that you could remove by settling things on Bitcoin? Like how could you improve your working capital needs, right? How could you free up that working capital if you're settling in Bitcoin? There's all types of I think incremental use cases that aren't being pursued beyond the flare gas mining today or mining with excess renewables that we hear about all the time. That I'd just love to see Bitcoin be a staple or a part of their portfolio as a capability that they can deploy up and down the value chain.
well, and to your point, really, this whole all of this comes back to the idea of final settlement, being able to get final settlement without an intermediary and getting it in 10 minutes. And I I just find it hilarious when people talk about, oh, Bitcoin is so slow. It's first of all, we have the Lightning Network for smaller transactions that's instant, and I'm not even going to get into that. But do you guys realize how fast 10-minute settlement is? The final settlement in 10 minutes. Normally, your dollar takes 45 days to settle, 30 days to settle. It depends what the cycle is. Even if you're doing broker trades, these sort of the best trading platforms have T+1 settlement. And by the way, you may have T+1 settlement in that you can go buy some other asset with those funds, or you can withdraw the cash from your account or whatever. But at the end of the day, you're still running the risk of that getting reversed. If you don't get final settlement on the Fed's balance sheet when they do their monthly or every month and a half, true up, those funds are going to get repatriated back, and maybe you've taken the funds out in cash and you've spent it in Vegas, but now you have an IOU to that institution. So now you have a debt to them, and there's nothing you can do about it. So you may think your Venmo transfer is final, you may think your T+1 trade is final, but it's not. And you're operating on a level of trust, and so far it's worked because there's very few instances of that happening and getting pulled back. But in a world of increasing volatility and hostility, all of a sudden the value proposition of not being beholden to that starts to look much better. But at the end of the day, a 10-minute settlement time is an incredibly quick amount of final settlement, and especially when you can just move those funds over and they're available in 24/7, 365 liquidity as well. That adds a whole new element. But I was talking with someone, and we were going. I won't get into all the details of it, but he was looking for ways to basically democratize investment in different things. So you could have some giant downtown office building or whatever, and instead of trying to find 4 or 5 investors to cobble together the cash, you almost just do like a public auction where you can buy 1%, similar to a REIT kind of situation. But it could be with any asset. It could be with stock issuance, could be anything. And his problem he was running into was that settlement issue. He was like, best case scenario, it's like a lot of times people want to trade this, and so they get something securitized today, but they want to be able to sell it by the market close, but they can't move it until the next day, and then the market's moved around on them, sometimes for the better, sometimes for the worse, but they want to lock in a certain price or hedge or do whatever. And he's like, that 24-hour settlement time is just killer. It's just absolutely brutal. And so it's not just people moving oil through the Strait of Hormuz, but it's all sorts of financial participants that a 10-minute settlement time is incredibly fast and a total game changer for so many people.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of FUD around the transaction speeds and whatnot, but
Big time.
yeah, I think in the grand scheme of things, especially when you're talking about large financial institutions or large companies executing any kind of transaction, yeah, you've got all these intermediaries and layers and layers of delays and process in between, and they're all taking a cut, right? And it's pretty expensive to manage those things. Bitcoin fees are pretty low right now, right? With less than one sat per V byte. So
Yeah,
yeah,
even in a higher fee environment, assuming you do proper UTXO management and that sort of thing, like it's still a pittance compared to 3 layers of Forex transactions where they gouge you like crazy, and then if you have to go into some other commodity or whatever, then there's a broker fee. So the whole yuan thing and into gold and out of gold, it's like that's a whole other set of brokerage transactions as well. And so all things
yeah,
considered, 1 or 2 well managed UTXOs is, even in a higher fee environment, is still going to be infinitely cheaper than all the people wetting their beak along the way of the way the current system is structured.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of opportunity. I mentioned like the popular use case right now is kind of in the field where there's a production of hydrocarbons, and usually that's off of stranded or flared natural gas. And there's a lot of reason why that makes sense, but I still think that that's still just the tip of the iceberg. Every point along the value chain, like you're producing, there's a logistics network, there's storage to a logistics network to a manufacturing site where you're making either refined products or you're making lubricants or you're making petrochemicals. Like all throughout that complex, the manufacturing complex, sometimes there's electricity that's bought and paid for being generated in a cogen facility that is being underutilized or not utilized at all. At LNG locations, which there's 8 LNG export terminals under construction right now on the Gulf Coast, and there's 9 more or 10 more that are approved, not yet under construction. Like natural gas and LNG facilities, I think have a lot of opportunity to co-locate small mining operations as well. If you're doing a turnaround at your refinery and you need to do maintenance, it's an alternative way to utilize some energy as opposed to just curtailing everything. So yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of opportunity up and down the value chain of where the operations are to co-locate small to mid-sized mining operations and make things a lot more efficient.
I really am I'm always shocked about how little of this adoption it's gone. You look at strategy, and whether you agree with what they're doing or not, it's indisputable that they've been one of the best performing companies in the past 6 years. Like how how have more people not tried to copy this? You look at the stuff you're dealing with. You just plug in a Bitcoin miner, and you're immediately offsetting some of your costs of flaring this energy. Like it's so easy. It's one step. You don't even have to do anything. Like you can be total left bell curve and just be like, add Bitcoin to balance sheet, put miner on property, and you're doing better than you otherwise would have. And it's just like it's still just resistance, pushback, not understanding it. It just always shocks me. It's just surprising to me.
Yeah, and right now I mentioned we're going to see higher revenues and higher margins for oil and gas companies right now, given the commodity prices, and you'll likely see a bunch of announcements around increased or inflated stock buyback programs,
Yeah, right.
and maybe some
Yeah.
announcements of increasing or growing dividends. And I spent a lot of time arguing for why storing or saving your capital in sound money for the long term would be better for your shareholders than increasing the stock buyback. So again, like now's the right time to move into to a Bitcoin strategy.
Or how about even taking some of that and putting the capital into the mining machines or the infrastructure to do this? It's just,
Right.
yeah, and just more stock buybacks, more CEO perks. It's just, I mean, it just blows my mind. But the shareholders like it because the next day there's green on their chart in their Schwab account, and that makes them happy. As with all things fiat, the short-term thinking is just incredible and blinds people to what's actually possible and out there. And by the way, will yield much larger returns in the future. It's going to be better for everyone. Everyone will be happier if you could just wait 5 years instead of 5 days. But
Yeah, it's interesting. Like I don't know why more companies haven't made the move. They're clearly this cycle's more about kind of the institutions setting up the groundwork, enabling maybe further adoption by other businesses or corporations. And I'm talking about folks like obviously 2024 was BlackRock and Fidelity and the others with the ETFs. But then last week we've had like Schwab and Morgan Stanley, and even this morning I think it was Goldman Sachs. Now they're getting into the ETF game. And they're kind of building out this infrastructure. They're building out trading or buy sell capability or custody capability. And I think probably, in the next 2 to 4 years, you'll see a lot more companies organically moving because there's a lot more available infrastructure and maybe a little bit more selection of counterparty to choose from. And maybe it's more understandable. And then we've gone through yet another cycle of Bitcoin price going up and down, and companies come out of it at the other end, and BlackRock says it's okay, or Morgan Stanley says it's okay, and they kind of now feel more comfortable. So I kind of still feel like you said it's still early, but it seems like there's a lot of groundwork being laid for the next wave of adoption.
Agreed. I mean, ever since leaving my corporate job and coming to work in this space, it always shocks me how much stuff is being built, how many entrepreneurs are out there, and it is a small space and a small industry, but at the same time, it's the most activity, the most building, the most innovation, the most creativity that I've seen in any industry out there. So
Yeah, and we haven't really talked about AI at all, but it's kind of both ends of the spectrum that I'm seeing, right? So you've got like banks and other folks moving into Bitcoin, but you've also got builders focused on privacy or technology or just upgrading Bitcoin's feature set or things like that, and people seem to be tinkering more, vibe coding more, or whatever it is. There seems to be just as much activity on the other end of the spectrum with individuals and freedom and other things like that as well, which is also encouraging, like given that we all may be skeptical of large institutions moving into Bitcoin.
yeah, eventually it was one of those things. It was going to be inevitable that if Bitcoin was going to be the global reserve currency, then everyone will use it in some way, shape, or form, and people will try to do what they know how to do, and it's not going to work out well for some of them, but we're going to have to live through the period of time where they go through that. And when we get the first ETF that try to rehypothecate, or brokerage firm that was lending on top of stuff and rehypothecating, and that cascades when it makes the BlockFis and the Genesis and the FTX, when it makes that stuff look like peanuts, that's when we'll start to get the cleansing and the awakening and the diverging away from the old way of things into the way things should be done on top. And I'm not just saying should be done like I demand people do what I want to do with Bitcoin. I think people can do whatever they want on Bitcoin. I just think if you sell paper products on top of Bitcoin and don't actually hold one to one the underlying, and even the futures contracts, like if you are issuing more or less futures contracts than you're able to deliver the physical underlying, like you will get destroyed. And so that's just math, that's just economics, and you can do that, and you can see how long you can get away with that, and that's fine. But like it just literally will not work on a long enough time frame. So
Yeah, I think that's one thing that I hope doesn't happen is that you know you, banks are coming at this with their way of doing things with fractional reserve banking, and that's just the nature of their operation today. And I hope that they learn the lessons of BlockFi and others who learned the lesson the hard way and collapsed because they didn't have their customer assets one to one. I certainly hope that doesn't happen because I think a lot of people are going to be buying these products and they're wildly popular. So hopefully they learn the lessons from our history without actually repeating them.
I don't believe that for a second. Human nature is undefeated, and they'll probably start off doing it the right way. They'll over collateralize the loan. They'll have margin calls at certain points, liquidation points. They'll pay back their loans when that happens, and blah blah blah. And then eventually they'll say, "Why don't we take a 2% risk? Oh, we got away with that. Why don't we take a 5% risk?" And that may take
Yep.
20 to 30 years to even play out, but we will end up there at some point. I think. I just think the greed and everyone. That's the other thing too, is humans also think like I'll get in at the beginning, I'll start the Ponzi scheme, but I'll get out. And like that's I don't foresee us making good decisions. Just really, really I mean, even with gold, right? Like the goldsmiths in 1905 knew how much gold they had, and then they issued more paper than the gold they had. And like
Yeah.
they knew a day could come when people would come get it, but they're like, hey, only 20% of the people are getting it, only 30% of the people are getting it. But then one day 100% of the people want it and you don't have it, or 80% of the people want it and you don't have it. So I sadly, I think we're doomed to repeat that, but I agree with you. I hope not to. I hope it doesn't come to that, but human nature never changes. Man is man, and we're sinful, fallen creatures, as the good book says. So,
Yeah, you're probably right.
anyways, I in the meantime, that's why we put such an emphasis on self custody, holding your own Bitcoin, because that is the way to avoid all this stuff. You will never have a bank run, and you won't get fractionally reserved against and lose all your coins because you hold the actual title to your coins and you're in control of it. And that's the exciting part about Bitcoin, is it gives you the optionality to do that. And that's why it's important that professional organizations like O21 Solutions and Sovereign exist to help people understand that and get them out of sort of that Wall Street wrapper, that world, that exposure that could end poorly at some point in time down the road, and just helping guide and shepherd people through that. So on that note, that's the positive part. You don't have to play that game. You don't have to be a part of that game. Let the other people play their game. There's the old saying that when two elephants are in a room fighting, you just watch them and let them fight it out and deal with the end result. So same thing with all this stuff. Let BlackRock and Morgan Stanley and Schwab and Fidelity and all these people fight with each other, and let them do their own thing. Don't participate in it. Step outside of it. You can hold your own keys, and that's how you insulate yourself from all this stuff. So that's the positive look on all this.
Yeah, agree. It remains fairly easy to go onto a River account and buy real Bitcoin and pull it into self custody. It's just as easy as buying an ETF in a brokerage. So
It is.
that's why we're here, is to help educate companies who are kind of new entrants into the Bitcoin space, figure this out for themselves, and listen to what their needs are and what their requirements are, and help match them with solutions that solve their problems and keep their stack secure.
Yes, and there's so many ranges of options that if you're at the beginning of your journey, there's less advanced plug and play options where everyone knows how to download software. You plug in the wallet, interact with the software, it walks you through it. It's very simple. You don't need anyone's help. It's very easy. There's that option, and to your point, you can just go on River, buy some Bitcoin, send to that wallet you just set up. It's very, very easy. If you can download some software, plug in a piece of plastic, write down 24 words, store it in multiple locations, and then hit send in one account and hit receive in another, you too can do it. And
Right.
if you're interacting with any of the legacy brokerage platforms or bank accounts or anything like that, you can absolutely handle a hard wallet. It's just something that'll take you a couple minutes to learn, and that'll be that. So, all right. Well, on that note, Matt, thank you for joining me today. Where can people find you? The website is the letter O, small case, 21solutions.com. And anywhere else you'd like to send people?
No, that's the main website. You can find us there and submit a contact form, and we'll get back to you on trying to understand what it is that you're trying to do, what problems are you trying to solve, and how can Bitcoin help you. And we're active on X, at O21 Solutions is our handle, and also on LinkedIn. That's where all the businesses are. So
Yeah.
actually, that's been much more effective than X as far as like customer lead generation. So yeah,
I unfortunately agree, as someone operating in this space as well, that unfortunately LinkedIn is a good place to communicate with people and reach out to people, and that is where all the businesses are. So sadly, until we get them over to Master, we're going to have to deal with a centralized platform on that front. But one day we'll get off that and or have some different version of a decentralized way to communicate with people. But Until
Yeah,
then,
and just the last thing, I guess, we're here on April 14th. Later this month, on April 28th, I'll be speaking at the Bitcoin conference. So if you're in Vegas, come check that out. I'll be on the energy stage. And I'm located in Houston, which is obviously the energy epicenter of the world. The next time we have a Bitcoin meetup, I'll probably be there as well. So you can come catch me in person.
awesome. Yeah, please say hi to Matt if you're out at the conference in Vegas. And if you're listening to this, I know there's a lot of miners slash energy people that listen to this. So if you just want to get in touch with Matt, reach out to him. And if nothing else, you can have a good conversation with a good Bitcoiner with a lot of energy experience. And so, as always, you can come check us out on Sovereign, SOVREIGN.io, and you can reach out to any of us there. And that's the best way to get a hold of us. So, Matt, thank you so much for your time today and appreciate it.
All right. Thanks for having me.
You got it.
Have a good day, Brandon.
You too.